now what you are actually done or you have done in the last few years plays a very pivotal role in what opportunities. For your success, that person is very important.
$1 million question now, that do hiring managers actually look at GitHub?
I also try to call out what are the things on which we don't have to reject a candidate. It does give me at least a first step impression that whether somebody loves to code. Honestly, they have been the best performers, in the company, and outcome of the result can be yes or no. There is no maybe. So I definitely try my level best to meet the candidate on a face-to-face basis.
Hello everyone. Today we have Vikas with us. He's a hiring manager. He's an engineering leader, also my ex-manager, who's going to help us understand a bit around his recruitment experience. Welcome, Vikas. How are you?
Yeah, thank you, Raj. Yeah, I'm good and really feeling good to interact with you again. Especially after working with you, and now you being a co-founder, a founder of a company, and trying to make things happen, which to me somewhat very close, because hiring the right talent for the company is a very important aspect, for them to be successful. So
Right.
thanks for
I've
it.
definitely seen you quite involved in the recruitment process in general as well. Would love to talk more about it, right?
Sure.
Sounds good, Vikas. So let's get started. In terms of like the process, let's define that you are going to hire for some position which opens up in your team, right? So what are the series of steps that you take to raise the requisition, or like how do you do that discussion with the recruitment team?
Yeah. So for that, I would try to put it in terms of what has been the primary skill set that I'm looking for that particular job, right? So when I typically hire, it's for two type of roles primarily. One is a hands-off developer, individual contributor, who has to really make things work and code it up as such over there. And the other aspect is more of a techno-managerial role, where somebody has to be closer to the technology, but at the same time have some experience on on building the teams, getting things done, and driving those things, right. So if I talk about the first category of the role that I try to hire, where I'm looking for more hands-on engineers or somebody who can get things done, right. So uh, if I say from a job, from the process point of view, yes, it is like, okay, setting up the job description. Uh, but what I try to focus is more on the attitude or the extracurriculars, for the candidate per se over there, right? Because
Right.
that's there. And then when you say from the process point of view, I try typically do sort of a two technical interviews, and I also add up one offline assessment, for that. And I'll tell you why that is important. But typically, I try to keep the interview process very lean, job description very, very simplified, but the focus is more on the traits like attitude and extracurriculars as such over there. And then
Right.
two technical interviews, which are also hands-on. I try to not have a lot of discussions per se. I try to see, hey, whatever we are discussing, is the candidate able to code up, and do those things. And so the way is, if these two interviews goes very strong, if I feel that, hey, no, this guy is a strong hire, then I don't go towards that offline assessment part, because that gives me a conviction that yes, this guy is really good. But if I feel in one of the interviews that, hey, there is some scope of improvement from the candidate, or maybe the candidate was not able to express well in the first two, then I go basically on the assessment part, right? And then go from there. So that's how I try to structure the first part of, or the category of the interviews that I have, right? So any questions, any follow-up on that aspect?
Yeah, I think one quick question on the job description part, like how much is your involvement versus how much is a recruiter's involvement in drafting that JD in the first place?
Yeah. So if I have to be very honest, see, putting a job description, to be honest, we don't put too much effort into that. Most of the
Right.
time, it is some of our past, job requisitions, and you try to mold it, right? But I think key point comes when I interact with the recruiters or our talent partners, because that's
Right.
where I'm able to very clearly explain my expectation from that particular role. I think for
Right.
me, more than the job description, that 10 minutes discussions with the recruiter or the talent partner is the thing, because that's when they really understand what we are looking for, and they try to get or source the candidate or the resumes accordingly as such.
Right. That the 10-minute call is more of a calibration of your expectation versus what they should
Yes,
find,
right.
basically.
So there, what
Got
I
it.
try to put forward is even some of my past colleagues or team members whom I've hired, and then showcasing, hey, these are the skills they have, right? And this is how they have been able to success. So we want to replicate the same thing, and I try to give them pointers that, hey, apart from the colleges or the companies, right? We need these capabilities also, right? We just
Right.
purely don't want somebody to be technically very good, but
Yeah.
not aligned to what as a cultural fitment we really want as such.
Right. Yeah, I think this is very important. A lot of hiring managers I talk to, they don't tell this part where the calibration is involved, right? If someone just gives out the skills to the recruiter, it's not helping the recruiter to be better at their job as well, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I agree on that part. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Sounds good. And what about like once the recruiter gives you some resumes, right? So how does that flow look like, and how do you think, is it that optimal? Do you think the hiring manager is always the back context with this is like a lot of recruiters say that hiring managers are very busy in like reviewing resumes, so it probably stretches to 2-3 days or so. How do you think that should happen, and how much time should that ideally take? That process.
Yeah. So I think what your observation is really right as such over there. But I feel if you really want to hire good talent, you have to exhibit that much of seriousness from your side also, because
Right.
somewhere the candidate also feels the same when you are reciprocating in the same way as such over there, right?
Right.
So the
Yeah.
way typically I do is, I try to revert to the profiles shortlisting within 24 hours, right? So one
That's
of my
great.
daily aim is, when I open my email, is to first not see my official email, but look at my talent partners, because I know
Right.
they're working hard to source us the candidate, and it's important for me to try to give them that response as early as possible as such, right? So for
Right.
majority of the time, I try to give that response sometimes on the same day, but on the
Right.
case trying to give it in the next day, so that they know
Right.
that, hey, whether this candidate is shortlisted, or do I need more additional follow-up information to make that decision whether we can shortlist or whether we have to basically reject the candidate.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. And do you see like your peers who are hiring managers as well? Do you see the same trend happening there, or what would you recommend to them if they had to like respond sooner to these profiles?
Yeah. So see, what I've seen is there is no standardization across companies. Everybody
Yeah.
follows their own.
Yeah.
But the way I feel is how much serious the hiring manager is to get the right candidate is what define the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whole interview process. If you're very much, that, hey, for example, for your success, that person is very important. If you can
Yeah.
put it in that way as such, then
Right.
you know how much serious you have to be to get the right candidate as such.
Right. Because it's directly related to a business deliverable as well. Like,
Yes, it is
yeah.
like that, because if you hire the right candidate, he
Right.
or she will solve a lot of your problems,
Yeah.
and make your team, your company successful. But
Yeah.
let's say if you have done the other way, then it
Yeah.
can be a lot of bottleneck for you also. That, hey, what have we really done as such, right? So I feel
Right.
when I talk to my peers, not all of them are, as I said, it's not a standard practice. Everybody processes the same, because sometimes the company wise are different also. Like some
Yeah.
companies. Are not that fast paced. Some companies are okay, because I'm not saying good or bad, but every company
Yeah.
has their own culture and other thing as such, right? So they
Right.
have. So I feel I don't think there is a standard way of hiring. Everybody
Right.
in their way, and which
Yeah.
which works for them basically, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I discuss with my peers, yes, there is a difference in the way they try to take this thing and I try to take this, but with some
Right.
common themes which are there, but not exactly the same.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. And probably $1 million question now, that do hiring managers actually look at GitHub? Is that
Yes,
one of
yes, yes. I do look at this GitHub, right? Because
right?
at least, especially when I'm trying to hire for the IC roles,
Yeah.
it it it, it does give me at least a first step impression that whether somebody loves to code.
Right.
That at least it gives me that, hey, is there is some consistency or not? I'm not
Right.
worried about how complex or those things are there, but is that consistency is there? Because if that consistency is there, that somewhere
Right.
that person has a genuine interest in coding, which I think is very important, when we're looking for an IC role as such.
Right. And does like open source contributions matter, or self projects, like say independent projects that someone has done,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
more?
Yeah, I do. Like when I see somebody who has tried to articulate their side projects or
Hmm.
open source contribution, even though they are not may not be coming from the top-notch colleges, I do give
Right.
opportunity that, hey, let's have an exploratory call. I want to understand what have you been
Yeah.
trying to do, right? So I do look,
Right.
because the way I feel now the world is transitioning, right? Now your education aspect, yes, they are important, but now what you are actually done or you have done in the last few years
Yeah.
plays a very pivotal role in what opportunities
Next.
you get. So I do consider them, and try to set them an exploratory call so that I can understand if that clicks to me, then I take them to the interview process also as such.
Right. Makes sense, definitely. And like say after the interview process, right? Say there are 1 or 2 rounds which have happened in terms of technical rounds, technical discussions around how the candidate is good in terms of like say technical implementation, problem solving, and other things. There would be one hiring manager round as well, right? So, what are some of the things that you look for in this round, right?
Yeah, so very good question and a very important process step in the interview process.
Yeah.
To be honest, from my past experience and the successful candidates or my employees or co-workers who have been, I always look for that attitude part, right? So
Hmm.
for me, yes, technically somebody can be there, there is some scope of improvement, but if I see that they have this, you know, attitude,
Hmm.
to say that, hey, I can learn these things, I can improve on these things, and I can get those things done, right? I
Right.
definitely look for them and try to give them experience, right? Like,
Right.
for example, in past I have hired, and even in my current organization, I have hired candidates who have been working on a totally different stack compared to what
Right.
we're working, right? But
Right.
I sort of hired them with that thing, that I was able to observe that yes, somewhere they have this attitude which aligns with the way we want to operate, the way we want to things. And if I fast forward those things, honestly, they have been the best performers, in the company, and they have,
Right.
you can say, uh, overachieved in what I was expecting as such over there, right? So I feel
Right.
when I am doing the hiring manager, technical aspect is one which I think they have
Hmm.
to meet for sure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also look for this attitude part, right? Where there is a flexibility, there is this energy, there
Hmm.
there are past examples where they have get things done as such over there. And if I see
Right.
those things, I definitely want to give them a chance.
Got it. How do you measure this? Because I know this is a subjective question, but how do you measure this attitude that you're saying?
Yeah. So see, for example, say some of them can be coming from the resumes also, right? For example,
Hmm.
let's say one of the questions that I try to ask them, hey, give me any one difficult problem that you have solved in the last 3 months or the 6 month of your project, and
Right.
give me one where you have implemented something, right? Like something
Understood.
where you have made life better of your peers, or you solved a very critical problem of your product, and do that, right? So when somebody has done that replicated time in the past, they would
Hmm.
be able to explain you very genuinely and with a lot of detail around it, basically.
Right. Right.
But if somebody has not done it, it will look more superficial, and they will not be able to connect those dots as such over there, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are few examples how I try, like this is one, or
Hmm.
other way. But and the other aspect is this: when you start to have a conversation with somebody, right, that the quality of that conversation which goes, right, like where somebody is very detailed oriented in
Yeah.
what they have done, or somebody is able to articulate above and beyond, suppose examples in production outages or something. So that really means that, like, they are not the one who are okay with the status quo. They are the one who really want to change that thing, basically, right?
Right. Right.
That has to be there. And if I see that I see I get a positive feeling about that hey,
Yeah.
they really want to do something above and beyond is what they define role as such.
Right. Makes sense. And like in that conversation, do you also measure communication in a way, like in case, say, you are hiring a junior engineer where probably their overlap with other teams where communication is very critical to the role is not required. Do you measure that as well in this hiring manager call?
So see, if I'm hiring for an engineering role, right? For me, somebody being extrovert or introvert, I feel is not a problem. I think
Right.
for me, if they're able to effectively communicate their point, I think that
Right.
is the key basic, right?
Right.
That is what
Got
I
it.
because see, what I've seen is there are even many introvert people who are very good thought. It's just that they
Yeah.
only come up with their idea when you nudge them a bit as such over there.
Right.
But
Right.
they're
Yeah.
able to comment, but doesn't mean that they're bad
That's
than anybody who's able to explain it more outgoing as such over there, right? So
right.
what I
Right.
look for is that for the discussion in question or the problem in question, are they able to
Right.
articulate and get that effective point across to you, which is fine. I think that's what I look for, right?
Right. Right.
But when I hire for, say, non-engineering role, let's say I hire for even HR role or the marketing
Yeah.
role, that because those things specifically needs your communication aspect more because that communication not only happening within the company, you're going out
Outside.
also, and that becomes a very important trait for them. So there I
Right.
try to focus more on those things because that is very important for what they're going to do on a day-to-day basis.
Day-to-day basis. Right. 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 Makes sense. Makes sense. And as you mentioned, like say you on your side, you are taking say 24 hours to review the resume and then proceed forward. But then there are multiple steps involved in the process to just recruit one person, right? It can be interview, it can be interview scheduling, it can be the time till the feedback is entered by the panel on the ATS and so on and so forth. So how do you encourage that speed also to be maintained across other stakeholders, right? Not just you and recruiter.
Yeah. So the way I do is, whenever we are trying to interview or start interviewing for a particular job, right? One of the things I do is jot down the expectations and how we are going to assess it, right?
Right.
And then we sort of form a core panel, right?
Hmm.
Who's going to interview, right? And then what I do is a internal briefing session where the objective is clearly called out that hey,
Right.
let's say these are the two technical interviews, so what will be our focus area, what is that we have to assess on, what are the things that we don't have to assess on, and
Right.
also I also try to call out what are the things on which we don't have to reject a candidate, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it is also very important to see that what is that we are looking for. Like for example, if I'm not building a low latency system, then there
Yeah.
is no need for me to ask a dynamic programming question over there because I'm not
Right.
doing those things basically, right? Then better
Right.
ask the questions which we are really doing those things, right? So
Right. Right.
that sets up that so that the panelists are consistent in their assessment, and I
Yeah.
also put them just a binary that your
Right.
outcome of the result can be yes or no. There is no maybe sort of thing,
Maybe in.
right? So that
Hmm.
is something that you have to be very clear. So you
Yeah.
prepare your questions or do the right assessment, but when you come out, you have to tell
Hmm.
me or the HR that it's a
Hmm.
yes or a no, but don't come as this maybe part because it doesn't help anybody as such.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I try to ask them to jot down their feedback because what I feel is that interview can be sometimes very draining. So people speak for 45 minutes, but when you say can you write down the summary, they may not be able to do
Yeah.
it after 2 days, right? So what I
Right.
ask
Right.
them is, hey, as soon as the interview is complete or you're doing the interview, try to jot those points because sometimes getting that thing, if I ask you for 3 days later, you may say, who is that candidate? Can I see the
Yeah.
again as such,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I try to ask them, hey, try to fill it on that day so that
Yeah.
you can give a more valid or more appropriate feedback compared to what you're going to fill 2 days later. Because in that meantime, you might have interviewed two more candidates as such over there, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so that is what I try to set up. So from my internal team, the two things which I do is to set up what you really need to ask. Like, don't go
Yeah.
about on those things. These are the things that focus that you have to work. And
Right.
as soon as you stop, try to see that at the end of the day, you are able to submit the feedback so that we can
Right.
move forward on that. So that's from the
Right.
internal part. On the talent partners part also, I think the ways I try to put it is in a fast-paced bucket that hey, if we give that feedback, you have to try to see how soon you can try to put the interview. Typically, let's say if I give an interview today and it's on the positive side feedback, right? I
Yeah.
ask them that hey, can we do it tomorrow or day after? Because my aim is that if it is a good case, in a
Yeah.
7 to 10 days, we should be able to close out that at least the decision making part of the thing that hey, your interviews are
Right.
complete, this is the result and this is the outcome as such, right? So I
Right.
try to keep that a bit of fast pace from my recruiters also, so that
Hmm.
so I think that's how things works out, and once you do it for a certain time, I think things fall in line, in that way as such.
Right, right. One interesting thing, because which I am finding from your at least explanation is that here you are on the driver's seat in a lot of sense, right? You are probably driving the discussions with the recruiter. You are driving the discussions with the panel. A lot of times, hiring managers, not from the hiring managers directly, but from the recruiters, a lot of times I get to see that they are driving all of this process, right? What is your thought in like how do you think the process should be completed and who should be the owner of this process?
Right. See, if you're hiring, let's say, if you're the hiring manager, to be honest, then you are the best person who knows that what
What
exactly,
needs?
right, like what
Yeah.
exactly what you're looking for, basically, right? Like,
Right.
like if you outsource it to somebody else, right, they
Yeah.
might get 50%, 60% of what you exactly want, right? And if you give
Right.
decision making to them, you
Yeah.
may get a good candidate, but there is a lot of probability that you may not the candidate that you want, basically, right?
Right. Right.
I feel you being a hiring manager, you need to be driving those things in the right way. Like I'm saying, how much you want to do it, like a heavy touch or a low touch, that's a separate play you want to do. But you
Yeah.
have to make sure that you're setting the framework right, so that
Yeah.
the person who's qualifying those things is the one that you really want. I feel for me that framework is the important part, right? It is not
Yeah.
about doing daily meetings and sync up and not low. It's just setting that framework and keep repeating it so that you get the right candidate as such. So I think
Right.
that's
Right.
something the hiring manager should do rather than outsourcing that. Hey, there is a company where interviews are happening the same across all the teams, which
Hmm.
may not be correct always, right? Because every team can have their own tailor requirement of getting something as such.
Right, right. And one more other thing that I learned from your conversation is those calibration calls kind of thing, right? Where you sync up your expectations with recruiter as well as with the panel. So that might be something that is quite valuable in the complete process as well.
Yeah, in fact, I have got feedback even from my internal team members that those things are good, because see,
Yeah,
what happens in a company, people come, people go, right? And
yeah,
they might be coming from different backgrounds, different companies, right? So
right.
they would have seen the past interview process very differently. So if you don't have that, you know, baselining with them, right?
Yeah.
They may start interviewing and asking questions, anything as such over there, and
What they are comfortable with in
they
a
are very comfortable, right? But unless you go
yeah,
and review and see, then you won't know, like, hey, what they're asking, right? Like, for
right.
example, right?
Yeah.
So that is where you have to basically be a bit more proactive to say that, hey, this is the baseline, and we need to adhere to those things and go along those things.
Right, right, right. Makes sense. Makes sense. And let's say after this interview, we start the offer rollout process and we roll out the offer, but most likely the candidate would have a notice period to be served.
Mm.
So in that particular period, post offer, the offer is rolled out. How do you see a hiring manager's role to ensure that that candidate probably joins, right?
Yeah, so from my point of view, once the offer is rolled out and the candidate is accepted, I definitely try my level best to meet the candidate on a face-to-face basis, right? Like whether
Hmm.
we can meet it somewhere, in the same city if we are, or let's
Hmm.
say on virtual connect. But I definitely want to, have that engagement so that they really understand that, hey, we are also serious about they coming on board. And also sometimes, many times, I also give a brief about the projects they're going to work on as such, right? So
Right,
they
right.
they also feel excited, right? But I feel that connect is very important, especially given, maybe now the market is slightly different, but if I go back 2020, 2021,
Yeah,
people had so many offers and other things, right? So so I think a bit of connect, showing that we really need you, and we we really value it, does help candidate to say, yeah, these guys value me, right? Like rather than
right.
at some companies, people are, we have rolled out the offer, we'll see when the candidate
If the
comes,
candidate joins.
and other things, right? So I feel
Right.
that engagement does help, because
Yeah.
it actually makes the candidate feels important, and
Yeah.
also candidate can get to know about the projects. And if you have really good projects, that would definitely help that guy to say, yes, this is something really good or hard problems that I'm going to solve there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. And like, do you also like just to be prepared, right? After all of these say engagements with the candidate still might join some other company because of some other reason, right? Do you also push your recruitment team to have a backup kind of candidate to
Yes.
mention?
Yeah. So I think that's a standard practice within our other company, right? In our company, because right, like nothing wrong with the candidate. Like everybody is free to make their decisions as such over there, right? So what we do is basically, let's say if a candidate has a 30 days period, so the first 2 weeks we don't interview anybody basically after the candidate is accepted. But in the next 2 weeks we start interviewing in a soft mode basically, right? So the idea is to have some pipeline in case the candidate is unable to join us, on the designated. But we do that because our projects are also very important. So we always need to have a bit of backup which is there, which we can fall back in case the main candidate, drops out as such. So that is something standard, and we do that.
Yeah, makes sense. Sounds good, Vikas. I think we are on the end of the episode. Thanks a lot for explaining all of these things. I think we have packed a lot of things in a very short span of time. So thanks a lot for sharing all the insights. And let's keep.
Thank you. It was nice talking. I hope I was able to provide some inputs, and all the best to you and to all the other fellow listeners as such.
Definitely. Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Vikas.
Bye.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.